Hello everyone, Sean here. Today I'm going to be talking about my favorite fantasy and sci-fi reads, which is probably unusual because you're like, Sean, do you even read that much fantasy and sci-fi? And the answer to that question is a little bit, but I'm getting back into it. So a lot of these things that I will mention are things I read some time ago. So I like to think that they still hold up, that I still would enjoy them, but could be that I will redo this list when I've read a little bit more and it will change completely. I will be doing a separate video for favorite comics and manga. I only mention that because a lot of the comics and manga I read are sci-fi or fantasy. So those will not be on the list because, like I said, there will be a separate video for those. And if you're itching to give me recommendations, like right now you're thinking, Sean hasn't read anything, I have to recommend him this thing I love. Or if you're in the middle of the video and you think that, or the end of the video, hold on to those recommendations because Elle and I are going to do a video at some point where there will be time for you to recommend your fantasy and sci-fi books to me so that I can get a bigger list of things to check out. One final note, and I will be enraging a lot of people here. I don't mean to enrage you, so don't be enraged. But I will say I have read all of the 14 books of the Wheel of Time. That was a big part of my teenage years, and they're not on this list. It's not because I think they're so terrible or anything like that. It's just 14 books, man. That's a lot of books. Maybe too many books for me. And you'll see my list is a lot of standalones, a lot of standalone books, or tops, I think. Well, we'll get into it. But generally, I like standalones, trilogies, maybe at the most. I'm not a huge fan of long series. So, starting off the list, this may be my favorite book on here. And I should mention, I'm not putting this in any particular order. It's literally just what I have stacked up to my left. So this is, like I said, maybe my favorite on here. Slaughterhouse-Five. This is a collection of a bunch of stories by Kurt Vonnegut, but Slaughterhouse-Five in particular, I think it's a masterpiece. A lot of people think it's a masterpiece. Not that I'm saying that means anything. But if you have not read Kurt Vonnegut, go read some Kurt Vonnegut. I think I've read 3 stories by him so far, 3 novels. Slaughterhouse-Five, Breakfast of Champions, and Cat's Cradle. Breakfast of Champions and Slaughterhouse-Five are both fantastic. Cat's Cradle is a little not as good, in my opinion. But Slaughterhouse-Five itself, if you're not aware of what it's about, there's a character named Billy Pilgrim who was in World War II. Particularly, he was a prisoner of war, and he was put in a slaughterhouse. So that's the name, Slaughterhouse-Five. And the slaughterhouse was in Dresden, and he was there during this bombing, and he saw the results, and it's horrifying. So, where does the sci-fi come in? Well, Billy is also, later in life, abducted by aliens. So, this story, it goes back and forth between his time in World War II and his time being basically a zoo animal to aliens who are studying him. There's also, if I remember correctly, I believe he shows up. There's a science fiction writer of the name Kilgore Trout who makes an appearance, and you also get these little short descriptions of Kilgore Trout's books, so that's kind of another sci-fi element. But Kurt Vonnegut is one of the funniest writers you'll ever read, even when he's writing about absolutely horrific things that partially he did experience. He was in World War II, but he has a way of just making you horrified one moment and then laugh the next moment. It has the recurring sentence, "So it goes." He'll describe something absolutely horrendous, terrifying, and he writes, "So it goes." So if you have never read Slaughterhouse-Five, if somehow you missed it in high school or whatever, go read it. It's an incredible book. Next on the list, another one that is more of a classic sci-fi or kind of dystopia. It would be Fahrenheit 451. Of the kind of holy trinity, if you will, of dystopia: Fahrenheit 451, 1984, Brave New World. This is actually my favorite, which I think is probably a not common favorite. I mean, I think most people tend to like 1984 the most. 1984 is a fine book, but Fahrenheit 451 I just found more compelling. I think the dystopia that Ray Bradbury envisions, where people are not reading and they don't care, is horrifying but also realistic. One of his characters in the book is so consumed with basically television that they can't understand why is it a problem that books are being burned. Who cares? It's TV. And I think that idea is so important right now. I'm not trying to get preachy here, but we love our social media. We love our television, our streaming, our everything. So as I'm talking to you on YouTube, which a little ironic, but if you haven't read Fahrenheit 451, again, it's kind of a classic, probably one that a lot of you have read in high school, at least if you're in the US. I would recommend it. It's a great book. It is, like it says up here, the classic bestseller about censorship. So give it a read. Find out what it's all about. All right, and this one is one I don't know if there's a lot of talk of, and hopefully I might bring it here. Some of you will check it out. This is The Yiddish Policemens Union by Michael Chabon. So this actually won the Hugo Award for fantasy, I guess, or science fiction, whichever you want to call it. And this one is a little bit of both, but I would say kind of more on the fantasy side a little bit. It is a alternate history where after World War II, Jewish people settled in Alaska, particularly Sitka, Alaska. So you follow a police detective and his partner trying to solve a crime. So it's a noir set in Sitka, Alaska, with an alternate timeline, and there may be a little bit of the magical / paranormal involved, a tiny little bit. But if you have any interest in reading noir or a mystery, or I wouldn't say it's a thriller, it's not exactly a thrilling book, but Chabon is really interested in how genre works and that sort of thing. And I don't think he believes in one genre being superior to the other, or literary fiction being superior to genre fiction. He is usually categorized as literary for the most part, but I don't think that's something he is concerned with. He's mixing it all together: noir, mystery, sci-fi, alternate history, fantasy, all of it. And it actually is a pretty satisfying book, and I would say it has that noir feel where at the end of it you're like, wow, did anything really get accomplished in the end? And it makes you think, about the whole plot. So I'll also say this one, at first I didn't like it. Not that I didn't like it, but I didn't love it, but I've thought about it a lot, and I've come to really come around to it. So it might be one I could see myself rereading this pretty soon. If it sounds remotely interesting, I would say check it out. It's a pretty fun book, pretty different book. All right, and getting to one that all of you I know, everyone knows, that would be the A Song of Ice and Fire series, particularly the first 3 books: Game of Thrones, Clash of Kings, and Storm of Swords, if I have those in the right order. Those first 3 books of A Song of Ice and Fire, I think, are pretty much perfect. They're fantastic books. I don't particularly love Feast for Crows, and I thought Dance of Dragons was okay. So that's why I don't have like the whole series on there. I mean, there's a reason that the TV show took off. It's great writing. Like I said, I think particularly those first 3, some of the best fantasy writing I've come across. So yeah, gotta put it on there. Okay, and next up we have The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin. I'll just say the whole Broken Earth trilogy. I did finish The Stone Sky recently. I did end with some questions. If I had to say there's one criticism I have, it's that there are questions unanswered at the end of the trilogy. And I was reading the last book. I was like, are we ever going to get some answers to some of these? But overall, I do think it is a success. I think the 5th season in particular is the best book of the trilogy. I think what she does, again, particularly in this one, with the writing style and the reveals that happen, are incredibly interesting. And the themes that she's writing about are also important themes. And I don't have a whole lot of time getting all of that. But if this is one that you've been maybe holding off on, I would say give it a shot. But maybe just know that you might get to the end and you might still have some questions for her. And I think I just have to live with that. When I look at the series as a whole, I think it's great. I think it's up there, for me at least. And again, I haven't read a whole lot, but for me at least, it's up there with some of the great fantasy that I've read. So definitely recommend 5th season if you haven't gotten around to it. And then I watched the movie and I liked the movie. Overall, I did like the book. I think there are fascinating ideas in the book. However, I do think Herbert's writing is peculiar. I'm interested to see what I think of the next books. I think I would like to read the next book at some point. But is his writing compelling in itself? Not, I don't think particularly. But the ideas, the world building, the Atreides family, Paul himself, Arrakis itself, everything is very interesting. So I was definitely gripped by the atmosphere, by the environment, by the world building. Not so much Frank Herbert's writing, but mayhaps that improves in future books. All right, and these happen to be next to each other. Next I have Foundation Trilogy by Isaac Asimov. This is another one I read way back when I was a teenager, which that was many years ago at this point. So hopefully, again, this holds up. I've been meaning to reread these, especially since I have this lovely Barnes & Noble edition here. If you've not read Foundation, if you're not familiar, basically there's a mathematician by the name of Hari Seldon. He is able to predict a decline in civilization. So he sets up a foundation for conserving knowledge before the galaxy goes into a dark age. And of course it does. He was right about everything. There is a very compelling villain in the second book by the name of the Mule. And I remember really thinking the Mule was pretty awesome. So I think it holds up. Hopefully it holds up. But this is one I'd like to reread. Right, the last 3 I have on here, probably more familiar to viewers of this channel than some of the early ones. But this is Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor. Elle had me read this as she really liked it, and I was like, okay, it's only 2 books. That fits Sean's criteria. 2 books, way less than 14. We're perfect. And I was genuinely surprised at how much I enjoyed this. And not because I thought it was going to be bad. It's just at the time I wasn't reading much fantasy. I think I was very much in like a nonfiction, sort of zone, I think, at the time. But Strange the Dreamer, it does, what I think it succeeds at is it talks about very difficult themes in a way that I was not expecting. The story doesn't go where I thought it was going to go, which is another thing that I found to be a pro. I mean, I was not able to predict this plot whatsoever, even when parts of the plot are given away intentionally. And by that I mean it has that storytelling device where you see a scene early and then it goes back and then you kind of see how you get there. Like in Breaking Bad in the beginning where you're like, oh, how do we get to this weird stuff floating in the pool, man? It does it well. And I think, again, I was surprised at the themes that tackled here. They're pretty mature themes for generally what I would think is young adult, but I also don't read a lot of young adult. All right, so I'll start wrapping it up in case it's getting long. Wave Kings by Brandon Sanderson. So I read this back when it came out, whenever that was, I was aware of Brandon Sanderson, obviously, because I had just finished The Wheel of Time. He finished the last 3 books, so that is how I was aware of him. I believe my brother picked up Way of Kings first, if I'm not mistaken, and then I read it. I really like Way of Kings. I haven't read Rhythm of War yet, but of the 3, I like this one the most, then Oathbringer, then Words of Radiance. I think this one stuck with me because the world building is so different. I was actually really surprised, and I think it's because it's coming out of Wheel of Time, Lord of the Rings, a lot of Forgotten Realms books, Dragonlance books, where everything is very dragons and swords and magic and that sort of thing. Where obviously this has magic and swords, I'm not saying it doesn't, but the environment itself felt more science fiction to me. I felt like the peoples and the different races felt very alien. The flora and fauna felt very alien. The high storms felt very alien. So in that way, I think it really scratched that itch for me. And then also I did find the narrative, particularly about Kaladin, pretty compelling. Although in this first book, I am kind of like, man, Dalinar is kind of boring. But I will say it does lead to a great payoff at the end of this book in particular. I think the ending of this book is great. All right, so that is it. Those are the favorite sci-fi and fantasies books, novels at the moment. I'll do my best to keep working in some fantasy and sci-fi as we go, and maybe this list will change. I'm sure there'll be some change, but thank you for watching, and I will catch you all later.